All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and taking a little bit of time out of your Saturday to come hang out with us for this webinar. Thanks for popping out of the screen share, Karen. That's perfect. So my name is Yenny. I am the founder and CEO here at Kari Prehab. And what we do is we provide specialized evidence-based strength training services for people with osteoporosis and osteopenia. And we often share at the beginning of our webinars that graphic with a statistic from the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, who have found that 64% of people who ask their doctor for exercise guidance on how to improve their bone density are not able to receive any meaningful guidance. So just to recap, 64% of people who ask for exercise guidance from their doctor are not able to receive any guidance. We actually poll our audience and our community on this pretty regularly as well. We found that number to actually be closer to 80%, which is absolutely astounding when you consider the fact that both the BHOF and the International Osteoporosis Foundation actually include specific types of exercise in their guidelines for both clinicians and patients. So we know from the research that we have, which is a lot of research, that certain types of exercise are not only safe, but extremely effective at improving bone density. With all that being said, there is still a ton of confusion and contradictory guidance out there about what actually works and what doesn't work. So that is why we wanted to create this webinar in collaboration with the BHOF for their Osteoporosis Awareness and Prevention Month. We wanted to create some clarity around what is effective for improving bone density when it comes to exercise and what isn't. And the one thing that I want to make really clear before we go into this is that we're not giving you our opinions in this webinar. What we're doing is looking at all the existing research that we have that looks at what exercises are effective for bone density and giving you an overview of that. So what you're getting is a scientific review of the research rather than our opinions. The one thing that we really find disheartening and see in our clients a lot is that they have often spent the 2 years between their DEXA scans spending time, money, and effort on exercise that the research already has indicated is not going to give them the improvement and the outcomes that they want. So aside from sort of going over all the different movement modalities today that are often recommended for bone density, we're going to look at the research to see whether those things are in fact effective for improving bone density. But the other thing we're going to talk about is how to look at research with a critical eye so that you can tell whether the data that it produced is high quality and reliable. Because that's another big thing, is that when you have the research literacy and you can look at this data critically, then it helps you to make really intelligent, smart decisions about what you can do and what you can't do versus what's going to improve your bone density versus what isn't. And that is really empowering and just allows you to have agency and control over your own health. Not to mention, you're not going to waste those 2 years doing something that you then find out was never going to work in the first place. So that is the aim behind this webinar today. To give you a little bit of a logistical overview, we have Karen Weinstein here, who's going to lead us through some lecture, and she's a total research nerd, so this is right up her alley. This is what she lives and breathes. There is a Q&A function that you can pop your questions into at any time. We're going to end with a segment just for Q&A. So if you have practical questions, I'll be moderating that and answering those. But a lot of the questions that you have are going to be really interesting for us to discuss as a group towards the end. So we'll save those for that segment. Finally, I can't wait to introduce Karen. She is one of our senior coaches here at Kari, which means that she's leading clients, our groups, through their 13-week strength training program for osteoporosis, which, by the way, is evidence-based. Karen has been doing this kind of work since 2008, and she is certified to the hilt. She has an ERYT 500 teaching credential from Yoga Alliance, which is the highest level of yoga certification that there is. She's also a corrective exercise specialist, a certified personal trainer, and a Yoga Alliance continuing education provider. She has many areas of specialization, including yoga anatomy, strength training, breathing practices, functional movement, and biomechanics, which for those of you that aren't familiar with that terms, that is the science of how our tissues, including bones, respond to being loaded. Like I said, she's a senior coach here with us at CARI. And I am really excited for her to give you some of this info that we have lined up for you today. Go ahead and take it away, Karen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annie, for that awesome introduction. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. So I just need one moment to pull up my presentation and we can get things started. Okay. All right. Thumbs up. We can see everything okay?
Looks great. Thanks.
Okay, fabulous. Okay. So moving on from that graphic. So today we're going to be talking about busting myths surrounding the movement modalities and different solutions you may have heard for building stronger bones. And as we get into this, here are the things we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about how we know which modalities actually do build bone. We're going to talk about how bones become stronger. And then we're going to cover some specific modalities: yoga and Pilates, walking, OsteoStrong, vibration plates, osteo boost, strength training, and impact training. These we find are the most common things that come up when people have questions about how to build bone. So before we jump into the meat of the presentation, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about research. So when we're talking about research, we have this beautiful pyramid that represents the quality of the information that we're getting from the research. And what you'll notice is that from the bottom to the top, we have an increase in the quality as we go along. At the very, very top, what we're looking at are randomized controlled trials in that purple section, systematic review, and then meta-analysis. And then all of this information is what informs the clinical practice guidelines for practitioners. So when the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation or the International Osteoporosis Foundation puts out guidelines, it is based on this research. They have a panel of experts who come together. They actually look at the research, they look at the meta-analyses. Often these people are the researchers who are helping to do the studies, and then they advise as to the best clinical practices and approaches. Unfortunately, sometimes this information just doesn't get filtered down to our primary care physicians, so there's a little bit of a gap when we look at the information that we're receiving from our doctors. So how do bones become stronger? So one of the things that's really important to remember is that bones are not rocks. We tend to think of bones as something inanimate, like a rock or a tree that's a piece of wood that's no longer attached to a tree. And instead, we need to start understanding that bone is highly vascularized tissue, and that highly vascularized tissue responds to the things that we do to it in our daily lives. So one of the things that we talk about often in this world is something called Wolff's Law. You can read the law if you want to, but I'm just going to break it down in simple terms. What this means is that the structure and the shape of our bones permanently adapt to the loads or the stresses under which they are placed. And I want to emphasize that that adaptation can go in two directions. It can be a negative adaptation or a positive adaptation. The negative adaptation will be when we start to see that we're losing a bit of bone. This also happens when astronauts go up into space because they lose the force of gravity impacting their bones. And so adaptation can go one of two ways. And this is because bones are what we call mechanosensitive. This means that they are sensitive to the mechanical stresses that we place on them. So for positive adaptation to happen, those forces have to be greater than our common daily activities. So if you think about things like walking, which we do all the time, that's what we're referring to. And I always love showing this particular slide, because if you take a look at the x-ray here, what you'll notice is this is an x-ray of a tennis player's forearms. And just by looking at the x-ray, you can tell which forearm is the one that she holds the racket in and is striking a tennis ball over and over with, because those bones are quite a bit thicker and more dense than the non-dominant arm. And this is what happens to our bones with appropriate loading. Sorry. Okay, so there are some research trials that have looked at how bone is affected. And this would be the Lift More trial, which some of you may have heard of. It's kind of a landmark trial in the world of building bone density. And then there's the Lift More M and the MEDEX OP trial. All of these were done by Dr. Belinda Beck out of Australia. The Lift More trial focused on women who had low bone density. A significant number of the women who were in this particular research study had already fractured and were at high risk for another fracture. The Liftmore M trial was the same exact protocol as the Liftmore trial, except it was done on men with low bone density. And then finally, the MEDEX OP trial had four different groups. They had a control group that was not on medication, a group that was on medication. They both did high intensity resistance and impact training. And then they were compared directly to two other groups, one on medicine, one not on medicine, who both did a Pilates-based intervention. And from all of this research, what we know is that high intensity resistance and impact training, things like deadlifts, back squats, overhead presses, impact like a jump drop, they're all really well tolerated. And in all of this research, there were no serious injuries, no adverse events. So this means it's safe and effective for older people with low bone mass. And in this research, they found that the bone mineral density, particularly in the lumbar spine, showed significant improvement. In addition to that, there were gains in muscle strength, functional performance, and they actually saw changes in people's posture. So when you start to see folks who are a little bit rounded through the upper back, that's called kyphosis. And they actually found that this strength training helped to reduce that kyphotic curve. And what we know from this research is that we need progressive loading to stimulate bone and muscle adaptations. So let's take a look first at yoga and Pilates. So there is a decent amount of research on both yoga and Pilates when it comes to strength training. Overall, we find that it really just doesn't have the kind of impact on bone that we need in order to increase and improve our bone density. However, yoga is really good at helping to improve function overall. It can help reduce pain. It can help with proprioception, which is one of the things that we need to maintain good balance. And when we have good balance, we're less likely to fall. We also find that it has a really good effect on the mind and body connection in terms of making sure that we have a way to reduce stress. And that's one of the things we hear over and over again in clients who have osteoporosis is that it brings an element of stress into our lives. So having an active way that we can reduce stress is a really nice thing to have in your toolbox. There was one study that showed that Pilates did increase bone density, but one of the really important caveats to note about this particular research study is that they only were working with people who had been not exercising regularly at all in the last 6 months. And what that means is these are often sedentary people that they're doing these research studies on. And if you're going from sedentary to starting to do any kind of exercise, you're likely to see some kind of positive change. The problem is, after a while, that completely plateaus, and you're limited with how much more bone you can improve your bone density from there. When it comes to yoga and Pilates, there is a really popular study that was done on 12 poses, a 12-minute routine for yoga for osteoporosis. This was done by Dr. Lauren Fishman back in 2016. You'll often hear this research study quoted as 741 participants, and then at the end, they conclude that they improved their bone mineral density. However, as you look at the numbers in the research study, one of the things you notice is that only 43%, 43, not 43%, 43 of the participants submitted both pre and post DEXA scans. And that means only 43 people could really be compared for before and after. In addition to that, we don't know that those DEXA scans were done on the same DEXA machine. And one of the things we know is that there is actually some variation between one DEXA machine and another, which is why it's so important then when you have your DEXA scan done, you're using the same machine every single time you go. And we don't know that that happened in this particular study. So the study concluded that there were significant bone mineral density improvements in the spine and femur, no impact at all at the hip. But there are some things we really need to take a closer look at with this research study. So first of all, we have that high dropout rate, which really undermines the reliability of the study. There was no control group. So they weren't looking at a group of people who did yoga and a group of people who weren't doing yoga so that we could directly compare. And then the other thing is there was no exercise control overall. So in other words, we don't know that the people who are taking part in this research study did only yoga because they did not limit what people could do. People were self-reporting. They were doing this yoga study at home based on a DVD that they had received. And so these folks might have been strength training. They might have been out there hiking on a regular basis. We have no idea what they were doing in addition to yoga. And then whenever a study is self-reported, it just opens things up for errors and a little bit of bias. I mean, I can't remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday. So if you asked me if I did my yoga routine yesterday, I don't know that I would give you accurate information. And then finally, and most importantly, this particular research study has not been able to be replicated. So keep that in mind if you hear about this particular routine for building bone density. In addition to that, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis. And if you think back to that research pyramid I showed you at the very beginning, these are at the very top of the pyramid. And what they did was look at 11 different studies, a total of 591 participants, all of whom were postmenopausal. And the research studies ranged anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more. And what they found was that for both yoga and Pilates, that it did not significantly improve bone mineral density in adult women when compared to control groups. So this is the kind of research that we really need to give the most weight to. And then when it comes to walking, I didn't pull up any research studies at all for this, and that is because we walk all the time. So if we think that walking is going to improve our bone mineral density, we're incorrect there. Remember, the forces have to be greater than our common daily activity. We've been walking since we were 1 year old. So walking and just continuing to walk alone is not going to improve our bone mineral density. Let's take a look now at OsteoStrong. So OsteoStrong is a chain of locations. They have 4 stations where you do what is called eccentric loading, which means that you have absolutely no movement at all. They're applying a load while you're in one static and held position. This takes about 10 minutes and is done 1 day per week. And if you go on their website, the claims that OsteoStrong makes is that it increases your bone mineral density, that it improves your strength, that it improves agility, power, energy, posture, and balance. And what we know is eccentric loading, where there's absolutely no movement happening while you are doing the loading, it's impossible to increase your power, your agility. It's impossible to have some functional benefits to this. It's impossible to improve our balance. So Dr. Gina Woods, who is an endocrinologist and bone health specialist out of UC San Diego, actually did a really nice article on this on her LinkedIn profile. And what she concluded was that we just need stronger evidence before OsteoStrong can be recommended. They need to have some randomized controlled studies that are done. It needs to be compared to things like resistance and impact training to determine if there's actually some kind of benefit here. In addition to that, there has been no research study done proving that OsteoStrong is actually safe. And we know from the earlier research that I showed you about the Livermore trial that we know that this is a safe way to go about improving your bone mineral density. So again, with OsteoStrong, there were no independent research studies. Much of the research that they used to support OsteoStrong was actually done by individuals who have financial ties to the company, which means there's a high risk of bias. Some of the claims that they make are based on non-human data or just non-generalizable data. There's a complete lack of focus on fall prevention. It hasn't been rigorously compared to any of the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation recommendations, which are weight bearing and resistance exercise. And then there are no studies, like I mentioned, that prove that OsteoStrong is safe. And finally, and conclusively, it's not supported by the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation as an appropriate modality. Along these same lines, we have questions on vibration plates. We field these a lot. And basically, this is inconclusive. There's been a decent amount of research done on this. You'll notice that there's a 2017 systematic review and meta-analysis. So again, we're talking about the highest level of research quality. They looked at 5 different trials using vibration plates on postmenopausal women. And basically, their results were inconclusive. And if you think about the way a vibration plate works, you're standing on a vibration plate. So the vibration is underneath your feet. And we know that vibration dissipates as it moves through an object. And in this case, that object is our body. And if we're looking to target bone mineral density at the hip, at the lumbar spine, we're really not getting those vibrations up high enough into the body to have any kind of real impact. So vibration plates may help to reduce pain. They may help to improve balance, but there's just no conclusion right now that it can do anything to help improve bone mineral density. Now we have OsteoBoost. OsteoBoost is also vibration based, but it's a little bit different. It's a wearable vibration belt. So it's actually putting the vibration in the areas of the body where we want to focus. At present, it's the only FDA cleared non-pharmaceutical prescription treatment that's available. However, it's important to keep in mind that this was only approved for use with people with osteopenia, not people with osteoporosis, because to date, all of the research has only been done on women with osteopenia. And they had a controlled clinical trial. So remember, this is kind of high up as far as the quality of evidence goes. And they found that there was a reduction of bone loss at the hip and lumbar spine. And I just want to point out that there was no improvement in the bone mineral density. What OsteoBoost does is it reduces the amount of bone that you're losing, but it's not increasing your bone mineral density. In addition to that, OsteoBoost fails to address other fall and fracture risk variables like balance, posture, functional movement, functional mobility, and strength. So when we look at what we know does help to build bone, and we look at something like strength training, one of the things we know that we need from strength training is progressive overload, which means we need to gradually increase the amount of load that we're lifting over time. So if you've never lifted weights before, no one's asking you to go to the gym and start lifting 20-pound dumbbells. We want you to start exactly where you are and then gradually work with someone who is knowledgeable and knows how to help you increase that load over time as your body adapts. It's also really important when we're doing strength training for osteoporosis that we consider axial loading. Axial loading is force that is applied in the same direction as gravity. A little while ago, I mentioned astronauts losing bone density when they go up into space. This is because they lose the force of gravity pressing down on their bones. Axial loading is forces that are moving in the same direction as gravity along the axial line of our body. So if you think along the center of the body down the spine. And these forces help to give the message to our bones that they need to become stronger. So if you look at the women in the photo, she's holding a dumbbell overhead. It's pretty easy to imagine that that force is coming down her arm, across her shoulder girdle, down through her spine, down through her hips, and then down through and into her legs. We also need to take a look at something called impact training. And impact training is a really hot topic right now. And I think what we think of when we think of impact training is something like plyometrics, which is jumping up onto a box and then jumping back down. And while you could progress to that eventually, what we're really talking about impact training, especially for beginners, are things more like stomping and doing heel drops. And I'm going to demonstrate stomping, heel drops, and axial loading at the end of the presentation. Impact simply means that you have two forces that are meeting each other. And in this case, it's your body and the ground or the earth. I brought up these numbers. This is based on some research that was done again by Dr. Belinda Beck, who did the Lift More trials. When we look at how much impact or force there is when we're doing impact training, it's looked at as a multiple of our own body weight. So remember, before I didn't pull up any information on walking. That's because I was saving it for here. So if your body weight is 1, walking is 1.2 times your body weight. So it's really not much more than we're used to handling on a daily basis already. However, when you start looking at things like heel drops, now we're getting into 3.6 times your body weight. And a foot stomp is 4.6 times your body weight. And this is the kind of impact that sends the messages to our bones that our bones need to become stronger. So the key takeaways that we would like you to walk away with are that bones are sensitive to mechanical forces. They can adapt positively or negatively depending on the mechanical forces that are or are not applied. The forces need to be greater than your common daily activity, and this means we need to have progressive overload. At this point in time, there are only 2 exercise modalities that meet this criteria. That is strength training and impact training. And one of the things that's important to note about both strength and impact training is that they actually help to prevent falls because they address improving balance, posture, functional mobility, and strength. So if you would like to join us for one of our upcoming cohorts, we have one starting on May 7th that I will be leading. And then after that, we have cohorts coming up on June 16th and on July 28th. You can scan that QR code there or just visit our website if you'd like to get more information. And I'm going to move back into a little bit of a movement demonstration here for you for both the impact training and axial loading.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that excellent overview. Hopefully that was helpful and provided a nice kind of bird's eye view of all the research that we do have available on exercise. While Karen is getting ready for the movement demo, we'll just leave this slide up for another moment here. Let me know when you're ready, Karen, and I
Yeah, I just need to move this back enough so you can actually see my whole body.
can. Good
Okay.
call.
So I think what we're going to start with is that axial loading image that I showed before. Okay, yeah, you can see everything. So when we talk about axial loading, the woman in the picture had weights that were up above her head, and you can clearly see here how the force would be coming down my arms, down through my spine, down through my legs, down through my feet. What we sometimes lose sight of, however, is that even if I'm holding the weights here or holding the weights down here, the weight is still coming down my shoulder girdle. So my arms are attached to my shoulder girdle. That means that that load, that force is being applied at my shoulder girdle and down my spine so that I have that really nice axial loading along the spine, which is one of the areas we really want to focus on. So a couple of other things that would give us that axial loading. So we have that overhead press here. We could also do a squat, holding the weights here, or I could do a little dumbbell deadlift, holding the weights down by my sides. All of these give us that axial loading. And it's really important that you're working with a qualified instructor because when we're doing these things, we want to make sure that we're moving through a range of motion where we're keeping our spine in a nice neutral position. Okay, so let's take a look at some heel drops now. Heel drops are exactly what they sound like they are. So if I just stand here and lift my heels a little bit and let them fall back down, I want to have this reverberation feeling through my body. So I'm going to hold a note. I'm not a singer. And you can hear that as I drop my heels, it actually affects my voice. That means that that reverberation is actually making it all the way up through my body. And that's the kind of impact that we need. Heel drops, if you've never done any kind of impact training before, can be really low. Or If you've done hopping, jumping, you can actually take your heels up pretty high and let them fall back down to the ground. Anything you do goes along with that progressive resistance exercise theory. So we just want these things to progress nice and slowly so that they meet you exactly where you are. The other thing that you can do is some stomping. So when you stomp, you want to think about stomping with the force that you would need to crush a soda can. So you can literally walk around and do a little bit of stomping. You can do this if you do walk on a regular basis. We're not telling you to stop walking. Walking is great for balance and functional mobility, but maybe you add a little bit of stomping into your walking as well. So those are just some really simple things that you can think about when it comes to strength and impact training for your bone density. And I'm still here. I can do extra demos if you would like, but now I'd like to just kind of open up to any questions that you may have.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was excellent. And hopefully, that little movement demo gave you a good understanding of some of the basic things that you can start doing to improve your bone density. Of course, keeping in mind the fact that it does have to progress and vary over time so that your bones stay interested and don't get bored with the stimulus that they're getting. I wanted to add one little thing in the presentation in the slide about OsteoStrong. We were actually talking about eccentric loading, and the term that OsteoStrong is actually that refers to OsteoStrong is isometric. So that would
Oh,
be
I'm
that
so
it's static.
sorry.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's a normal brain fart to have. So it's isometric loading, the
thank
static kind.
you.
Um, and feel free to start popping your questions in the Q&A. I see a couple coming in already. That is excellent. While you guys are thinking of your questions or maybe getting a drink of water, I'm also going to share a quick poll with you, which is just one question. And what we would really like to find out is how much exercise guidance you all received from your medical providers. So this is something that is really, really helpful for us to know. And again, gives us context on the kind of environment that you guys are coming into when you're attempting to get more informed, get more educated about how it is that we can improve bone density. So let's get into the Q&A now. This is an excellent question, one that we deal with a lot. Marilyn is asking, what about walking with a weight vest?
Yes, weight vests are great. So yes, adding that extra load of a weight vest is a really good way to incorporate it, especially if you're someone who really enjoys taking walks regularly. Weight vests are actually part of our protocol at CARI. We have a whole weight vest circuit that we do with everyone. It's a really nice way to have that axial loading. So remember, the weight vest is sitting on your shoulders, adding those good compressive forces down through your body, the kind that tell your bones that they need to get stronger. Just make sure, if you have never worn a weight vest before and you're going to go out and take a walk, that however far you walk away from your home, you also have to turn around and walk back. So if you're going to start, you want to start in nice small doses, just taking a little walk and then coming back, ditch the weight vest, and then maybe you finish the rest of your walk and add a little bit more incrementally over time.
That's a great answer. And you can also sort of get a gauge on how your body is responding and what's like a good amount of loading by monitoring how you feel the next day. Like how do you feel sore in certain parts of your body, or do you feel nothing? Like the load was very manageable and you have no soreness at all and you recovered perfectly, in which case you can probably add a little bit more stimulus. And yeah, to that end as well, the weight vests are a very practical way to add more of that axial loading into your day. Sometimes people feel really intimidated about starting a whole new exercise routine that they have to stay consistent with. So this is an excellent way to get that stimulus, that axial loading, without quote unquote doing another workout. So very practical way to get that in. Um, Somebody's asking how much stomping or heel drops to be effective.
Yeah, so there's actually some research on this. They've actually done research both on postmenopausal women and on older men. They did this really fun trial where they had people do hopping on only one of their legs and the other leg served as the control. And what they actually found is of 0 to 4 and 7 days a week that it was best to do heel drops and stomps 7 days a week. And it's best to actually spread it out through the day because Yenny mentioned before that bones get a little bit bored. So they really only pay attention to the first few impacts. And after that, they're like, okay, we get it. We get it. And then they stop paying attention. So it's better to do like 10 heel drops in the morning and then 10 in the afternoon while you're making your coffee, and then maybe 10 later on while you're waiting for water to boil while you're making dinner or something like that. So you'd want to spread them out.
Great answer. Thank you. I'll hop ahead to another impact and stomping question before we go back to some other themes. So somebody's asking, do we need to jump or stomp in bare feet, or is the impact the same when wearing shoes?
Yeah, it really depends on the shoes that you're wearing. So we do generally, I've been doing this forever. So this is something my body is very used to. But we do recommending having like a little bit of a yoga mat or some carpeting underneath you or wearing sneakers. Just if you wear sneakers that have those really, really fat foam soles, you may want to do it on carpeting or a yoga mat instead. So you're getting a little bit more of that impact through your body.
The impact is another thing that people sometimes get kind of nervous about because often the recommendation from the doctor is to avoid impact, which it's helpful to understand that what they're giving you with that guidance is short term risk mitigation, but not a long term solution to your problem. So eventually, that stimulus does need to be reintroduced. But if it feels really scary, then wearing shoes with a little bit of padding is a great regression. It's a great way to reduce the impact if you're feeling nervous about it or you just want to kind of ease your way into it. And, just like any exercise modality or weightlifting, you want to start small and conservative and then work your way up. So, depending on your comfort level, wearing some slightly padded shoes to begin with could be a great way to develop a little bit of confidence and get over that hump of maybe being a little bit, fearful of it.
Yep.
Okay, Victoria is asking for modifications, please, since I have cranky knees. We have lots to say on this topic. I will say, as another owner of cranky knees here, what really helps is resistance and impact training.
Yep. It seems counterintuitive, but really what we find is, I'm in the middle of taking a cohort through right now, and a lot of women came into this cohort with the same issue. They have cranky knees. So what we do is we just reduce the range of motion, very much like wearing your sneakers to start doing some impact training that eases you in. So does just reducing your range of motion. So you might start doing this with very, very light weights and a small range of motion. And then over time, you can add a little bit more weight and add a little bit more range. So when you're thinking of things like squats, you don't have to go all the way down, butt to the floor. This could be a tiny little knee bend, and we just let our knees acclimate over time to that added loading. And what we've found with our clients is that they start reporting reduced pain as they go through the program.
It's always interesting to think about this too, because often, like you said, if you are in pain or discomfort, the intuitive thing feels like you should be avoiding movement. But that is actually not how exercise works. When we apply stress in a controlled, deliberate manner, which is what we're doing when we exercise, your body responds by getting better at tolerating that stress. In other words, it becomes stronger. If the opposite was true, anybody that exercised would be getting weaker and more frail as part of their exercise regimen. So it's the total opposite. When we stress our bodies in a meaningful, controlled, deliberate way, preferably under the guidance of a specialized coach who understands what you're trying to do and what your needs and goals and limitations might be, then the answer is that you get stronger, not less strong as a result. So cranky knees are knees that are having trouble tolerating the stresses of the movement that you're currently doing, the challenges of those movements and the demands on them. So the solution is to make your knees stronger and better able to tolerate those stresses. Um, Oh, I love this question as well. We get this one pretty often. Are free weights better than weight machines?
Yes, they are. Yeah, free weights for a couple of reasons. So first, you saw that demo a moment ago when I was doing the axial loading. That's easier to do with free weights than it is to do with exercise machines. Exercise machines, oftentimes you're anchored to a chair or bench and you're only moving one area of your body at a time. Whereas when you're holding free weights, you get that axial loading because you're holding the weights in your hands. But in addition to that, when you're using free weights, it actually has this shifting center of gravity, and your body is adapting to this shifting center of gravity as you do the strength training, and that actually helps you to improve your balance as well, which reduces fall risk, which reduces fracture risk.
Fantastic answer. Thank you. We always recommend free weights over weight machines, and just anecdotally, I can also say that we've had multiple people come to our program feeling extremely frustrated that they have actually been trying to strength train. They've been going to the gym for a while. In some instances, they've even worked with personal trainers who just happen to not be specialized in improving bone density. And that is a perfect example of the scenario that we were referring to, where you're trying to do all the right things, spending time, money, and effort to accomplish them, but we're looking for a specific outcome, and that requires very specific stimulus. And unfortunately, with the weight machines, it's pretty easy to skip any of the axial loading that you actually need for bone density. So, we the other thing that we kind of say about this is that any exercise that you're doing that is actually challenging you is never wasted, in the sense that you are building and maintaining a good baseline level of fitness, which for people that come into our program, for example, just gives you a huge head start when it comes to actually then incorporating the right techniques for improving your bone density. So it's never wasted in that sense. It just gives you a significant advantage when you do start strength training in a way that will actually impact your bone density as well. Um, Susan is asking, can you recommend how much weight and what kind of vest if you are new to the weight vest?
Uh, when people join our program, we do send out links with that information with which weight vest we recommend. But essentially, there are two basic kinds of weight vests. Ones where you can increase the weight over time. They have little pockets in them where you can actually add weight and allow your body to adapt really slowly. The other kind would be to buy a certain amount of weight, say a 16-pound vest, and you just wear it in these really small doses and let your body acclimate. And Yenny kind of talked about this before, where you'd wear it for a little while, see how your body feels the next day to help you determine whether maybe you wore it a little too much or if your body is ready to wear it for a little bit more time.
Paula has another question about the whole body vibration plates, including one that is FDA approved, still no good, the power plate. My understanding is that the hertz has to be high enough. So, like Karen mentioned, with the vibration plate, the main issues are that the stimulus is located incorrectly relative to the target tissue. It's too far from the target tissue to be effective, and it's very difficult to progress the stimulus in a meaningful way that would actually allow for those bone density improvements to happen. So with anything that people enjoy doing, we always say that you should continue doing those things if it's something that you enjoy, but it's not giving you the most bang for your buck if improving your bone density is the primary outcome that you're after. And my understanding is that FDA approval simply means that it's not unsafe. It's not testing for efficacy.
Right. And the other thing is a lot of the research studies, like when you look at that systematic review on vibration plates, a lot of the studies are done at different frequencies for different durations of time. And that makes it really hard to come up with a specific protocol that we know is actually going to work. And that's part of why it's kind of up in the air, because there's just too broad a scattering of information right now to pinpoint anything.
More research is needed.
Yep.
Carolyn has a great question, and one that comes up a lot as well with us. How does knee or hip arthritis influence how we address bone health?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's kind of like having the finicky knees. We know that movement actually helps with osteoarthritis. Many of our joints are synovial joints, which means that when we move them, we're actually releasing synovial fluid, which lubricates the joints. And so Again, kind of like Annie was saying, when you're hurting, it seems like you shouldn't move, but this is the exact opposite. There's so much research out there to show that with osteoarthritis in particular, movement, it's like motion is lotion, right? It's that movement is really helpful with osteoarthritis. So you may not feel great going into or necessarily during, but oftentimes afterward, you feel so much better.
And again, the key here is really working with somebody who understands all this and is able to give you individualized guidance, which is, we designed our program to include one on one private communication with your coach on a daily basis so that they can assess how you're doing, receive your feedback, suggest modifications like reducing range of motion or weight or number of reps so that the stimulus is basically meeting you where you're at and it's both safe and effective. And with things like osteoarthritis in the hips or the knees, it's really a case of kind of titrating the stimulus in a way and in a dose that actually is helpful because obviously we don't want to overshoot it and have you get flared up and sore and then be unable to do anything for multiple days. Like that's not what we want at all. So it's just about finding that right level of stimulus, the dosing, which again is where you want like a qualified professional at the other end of the line who can answer your question and then give you like a practical set of instructions on how to proceed so you can continue progressing towards the outcome that you're after. How do you know what size weight to purchase? This is a great question too.
What size weight or weight vest? Weights?
Weight, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, what I find is just working with women in general, we've all been trained to lift like 3 pound weights. And if that is what you have, that is where you start. However, one of the things that happens when you start doing strength training is these really fabulous neurological adaptations are the first ones to happen. And that means that your brain gets better at communicating to your body to recruit enough muscle fibers for you to lift more weight. And so what we find is that in the first like 6 to 12 weeks, there's actually a pretty rapid increase in the amount of weight that you're lifting. And then that kind of plateaus and it takes a little bit longer to increase from there. But if you're just starting, you start with what you have. And when you feel like you don't want to be able to do more than 12 to 15 reps in general with a weight, if you're able to go up into the 20s with a weight that you're using, that's a pretty good indicator that you need to move on to something that's a little bit heavier, just as a general, piece of advice.
And in the context of what we do specifically, anytime that somebody wants to join one of our groups, you go through a pretty thorough intake process where we got a lot of information from you about your previous exercise history, if you've had injuries or other conditions that affect your ability to move, maybe joint replacements, things like that. And that really gives us a pretty solid overview of where you're at. And subsequently, when you join the program, that is when your coach also becomes available. They review your intake information, any relevant email communication that we've had with you about this. And they put that all together so that they can make an informed recommendation on what weights you should get. So that guidance is kind of built into our program because what we're trying to do is just reduce the guesswork around like what to do, when to do it, and how to do it essentially. Betty has a great question. I have a total ankle replacement, excuse me, left ankle. I have trouble going up on my toes and cannot do any stomping or putting pressure on that ankle. My calf muscle is totally atrophied. I would like to do something to see if my calf muscle will come back. Any suggestions? The great thing about this is that your calf, just like every other part of your body, is going to respond to the ways in which it's being stressed and used. So there is lots that you could. It's not if it comes back; it will come back. Karen, I'll let you talk about that more.
No, you pretty much started with what I was going to start with. I mean, we know that your body responds to the stresses you put it under. So when you start strength training, your muscles are going to get stronger. And if you cannot do the stomping and heel drops, that's something that you know is out for you because of that ankle, then you doing the axial loading is going to become that much more important as a way to help you maintain your bone density. And if you're lifting heavier weights with your hands and putting that pressure all the way down through your body, we do some walking and marching and things like that. you're going to be doing coming up onto your toes. Even if you're not dropping back down, you're going to be doing some heel raises and things. So there are things to help address that atrophied calf muscle for sure.
And I would also be interested to know regarding the range of motion limitations that you're reporting, whether those are a result of like compressive joint structure limitations that are the result of your surgery. Like, is your ankle joint itself shaped in such a way that it simply like hits a hard end and that's your end range of motion? Or are there tensile soft tissue limitations, which are things are often very tight and kind of like bunched up and clenched up after a traumatic event like a surgery. But soft tissue adapts. Like that is not the same as like, well, that's the bone on bone end range of motion. Your soft tissue is actually going to adapt to being loaded and moved. And strength training actually increases flexibility, contrary to popular belief. And range of motion work in that way post surgery can be very productive and actually help to bring some of that flexibility back. The usual caveat, of course, is always that it's very context dependent, and it's unique to your needs. So this is something that you would be discussing with your coach and kind of seeing how you progress. But yeah, that's not like it's like a kink in the road, but it's not a real barrier. Yeah. Um, Liz has a great question, and Liz, actually, I think you're going to be working with Karen starting next week. Are the spine and hips equally responsive to axial loading and impact training, or is one area easier/harder to build? Awesome question.
Yeah, yeah. So the spine is more responsive to axial loading. One of the hardest areas that we find to target is actually the neck of the femur, but that's actually where the impact training comes in, because what they're starting to find through research is that the femoral neck actually responds really well to the impact training, even though it doesn't respond as well to the strength training. So hip and spine strength training, impact training for the femoral neck would be, and we have all of that is incorporated into the way that we program everything.
And I think the research on this is sort of a little bit newer and mixed as well, but
Mhm.
the bone in the hip and the femur is different from the bone in the spine as well. So they do respond to slightly different types of loading. And if you think about the forces that the lumbar spine is designed to withstand, it's really like that up and down um, like force transmission, whereas your hips actually, it's like a ball and socket joint, and it moves through a pretty wide range of motion through the socket, and it likes to be loaded in all of those different positions. So that's why like different types of hopping, like front to back, side to side, one leg, two leg, switching between the legs, like you're trying to vary it up so that you're providing loading from all of these different directions and targeting all the existing movement capabilities of that particular joint. That was such a cool question. Thanks, Liz. Um, okay, great question about the weight vest. Are there certain lumbar conditions that a weight vest would be contraindicated for?
This is outside my area of expertise. I mean, if you have a current compression fracture, you would make sure you get your physician's approval before, or your, surgeons, depending on what the situation is, before engaging in any kind of exercise. But I know that I have scoliosis. I wear a weight vest. It hasn't exacerbated that. I've had pre and post testing. I know that strength training and wearing a weight vest have both prevented my spine curvature from getting worse. So if you're talking things like scoliosis, that's something I'm familiar with. Compression fractures, we want to make sure they're completely healed. But anything else, we might have to get some information or feedback from your physician.
Yeah, and I would say to add a little bit of context to that too, that we would really want to know. You don't have to share this, but we would really want to know what lumbar condition you're dealing with, because that obviously influences the approach. In a general sense, though, we have people in the program with stenosis, with spondylolisthesis, spondylolysis, all of these things, and in general, what all of the common thread with all of these conditions, including osteoporosis, is that the spine really benefits from better, more comprehensive muscular support for the structure of the spine, which is what this program does. So, it is for osteoporosis, but there is a ton of overlap between like what you do for somebody with osteoporosis versus like just a weak lower back that is prone to being thrown out or in misalignment or something like that. So we would just want to know a little bit more about what exactly you were dealing with. And this is also why we do have a osteo specialized physical therapist on staff who conducts a live movement screen at the beginning of the cohort, and is also kind of available for these more like medical grade questions, which honestly, it's extremely, our coaching staff is so knowledgeable and experienced with this that it's extremely rare for us to actually have to contact our physical therapist, but she is there for this exact kind of thing. Um, Victoria has a great question. How about holding weights when doing heel drops and foot stomps?
Yeah. That's a perfect example of a progression or progressive overload. You'd start doing it with body weight. Over time, you might make the height of the heel lift a little higher, and then eventually you'd add in a weight vest or some held weights in your hands. So you got the idea.
Yeah. um, oh, this is a great comment. Okay, I'm glad you're addressing myths. Recently, the CEO of Strong said, quote, "In our opinion, osteoporosis is not a disease. It's just a deconditioning of bone, and anything that could be deconditioned can be reconditioned. It's made kind of a bigger deal and more of a complex than it really is." End quote. That sounds really problematic. Um, I agree that the last part is highly problematic because osteoporosis is obviously a serious consideration when we consider the impact that it can have on your health, your well-being, your quality of life, your independence, and it absolutely requires a specialized approach to be addressed correctly, which we already kind of found out over the course of the presentation is not something that OsteoStrong as a brand is able to provide, nor do they have the research to suggest that they can provide it. I will say, though, that I don't disagree with the first part. In fact, I think this is a very empowering and optimistic take on osteoporosis, which is that yes, any living tissue in your body can become deconditioned when it hasn't been appropriately challenged. And that effect is completely reversible. When you start to load those tissues, they respond and they become stronger. We absolutely don't want to oversimplify or overgeneralize the specifics of the process that need to be in place for that to happen. However, I do wish that actually, we get tons of comments on our social media videos and things like that saying like, "Oh, osteoporosis can't be reversed." It's like, it 100% can. So I actually do in some ways wish that more people had this mindset of like, oh, I'm completely adaptable, and I can make myself stronger in these specific ways, without in any way minimizing the severity of the condition or the specificity of what needs to happen there.
Mhm.
Karen, maybe you have something to add there.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a perfect way to address that. I mean, we're bioplastic, right? That means that we are, as long as we are breathing, we are adaptable. And there are people who've started strength training when they're in their mid 80s, and they continue to go on and increase those weights over time. So you are endlessly adaptable. Your body is incredibly resilient, and it's always working to keep you in optimal health. You just have to give it the right input.
Yeah. Carolyn is asking whether body weight exercises are helpful. They're easier when traveling.
Yeah. So much like walking, yoga, and Pilates, those are all body weight exercises, and there's really no reliable evidence to show that they help with bone mineral density. So we really need some other loading. We do know that people travel, and that's something we actually address in our program. So in that case, we would have you bringing some resistance bands with you, and following along with some guided exercises that way. Resistance bands are a really nice supplement. They're not going to take the place of hand weights, but when you're traveling and things like that, then you're kind of in maintenance mode, right? You just kind of want to do what you have to do so that you're not losing ground versus actually building bone.
Yeah. We never want to take like negative Nancy mindset with this. Like doing something is certainly better than doing nothing. But again, it pays to like apply a critical eye to what you're doing. Like if the goal is, if you have a specific goal in mind, then like acting in keeping with that is going to help you get there.
Yep.
Oh, oops. Oh, sorry. Okay. Susan has a great question. Can our bone density increase just by your exercise program alone without looking at food or supplements, etc.? So the vast majority of our clients come into our program with the desire to increase their bone density while avoiding or at least delaying taking pharmaceuticals. And a huge majority, 80% of our clients do improve their bone density at their next DEXA scan. We cannot control for what nutritional changes they've made in their diet or what supplements they're taking. And this is a highly individualized thing as well, where, if you happen to have been deficient in one thing and you suddenly start supplementing with that, then that is potentially going to have a really beneficial sort of compounding effect, which might not be the case for somebody else. So um, we can't say across the board yes or no as it relates to the food or the supplements. But what we can say is that an overwhelming majority of our clients do report improvement at their next DEXA scan. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. Another question. I have forearm osteoporosis. I have been weight training for years, but have not been able to increase my DEXA score. Have you seen success with this issue in your program? The forearm is actually I would say the least frequently scanned area, but we do we know that it is a common fracture site. So we do address it in our program. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, we have things like planks. We have you doing chest press and row. Those are all exercises where you're specifically bearing weight at the forearm bone and putting some of that axial loading. Remember, axial loading, if I'm standing, is coming down through my spine. But if I'm doing something like a plank, the axial loading is coming down through my shoulder and into my arm and hand. And we do address that for sure with the exercises that we offer in our program. As Yanni said, because we know that that's a common fracture site. It's often how women find out that they have osteoporosis is because they have a standing height fall, they break a wrist, and then they end up getting a DEXA scan.
Yeah, and of course, even exercises that are not, we don't think of them as a forearm exercise, but if you are doing an overhead press and holding the weight overhead, that axial loading is happening through the bones of the forearm as well. And even in something like a front rack squat or a goblet hold of a weight, there is force being axially directed through the bones of your forearm. Great question. Paula says she's listened to a lot of YouTube influencers in the bone space that who cite studies. It's disconcerting the variation in what they say is effective. Yeah, so there's no rule that says that a YouTube influencer couldn't be extremely well informed and uh, know what they're talking about. I would probably still weigh that up against, the formal stance of an organization like the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation or the International Osteoporosis Foundation, who have entire committees of scientific advisors who are looking at the research and then developing their guidelines based on that. Which isn't, again, not to say that YouTube influencers cannot be informed, just that they are not scientists or researchers who specialize in this field. As far as the variation in what they're saying is effective, I would go look at the study, apply a critical eye, see if it has been appropriately randomized and controlled and blinded, and subsequently whether the data that it produced is effective. Because you can cite a study, but if the study itself is garbage, then the citation is not really worth very much at all either. Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean that it's kind of like the yoga study that I brought up before, where if you look at the abstract, it says it was a study of 740 plus people and that they improved their bone mineral density. But when you really start digging into the numbers, you see that only a certain percentage of them actually had osteoporosis and a certain number actually were adherent to the protocol and then, supplied the proper. So like reading the abstract sometimes isn't enough because the abstract itself can be misleading. And the other thing is you want to make sure that whoever is running the study doesn't have anything to gain by having positive results in the study. And that's what we're seeing right with OsteoStrong, and actually with the 12 yoga pose regimen as well.
And that's really the case with the strong studies too, is that like they report increases in bone mineral density, but we know nothing about what those participants were doing outside of going to OsteoStrong. Like maybe they overhauled their diet, started taking calcium and vitamin D and vitamin K supplements. Maybe they added other strength training into their routine. We have absolutely, maybe they went from being completely sedentary to also hiking and walking or even jogging and running, like Karen said. So there's too many loose variables floating around that we can't pinpoint. And subsequently, we can't ascribe the improvements in bone density to OsteoStrong because we don't know that that's the only intervention that they were doing.
Mhm.
The blinding is an interesting point too, because ideally, you don't want the participant to know whether they're receiving the treatment or a placebo of the treatment. But if you're going to OsteoStrong, you you know you're receiving the treatment, and that introduces a different form of bias as well. So the results are kind of unreliable in that way as well. Um, that's a really interesting question, though. Marilyn's asking about the size of the weight vest. So, Marilyn, we don't know anything about you, unfortunately, so we can't really make specific recommendations. This is something that we do advise all of our group participants with, though, when we have a lot more information and context about you. So, unfortunately, it's not, we can't really make a specific recommendation just like in this context, unfortunately. Um, Betty has a follow up comment about her ankle joint replacement. I have very limited flexion going forward, no toe pointing. I have much more flexion with lifting my toes up and going in on my heel. That's actually great. So,
Yeah.
like big toe mobility limitations are one of the barriers that people run into with movements like lunging. So the fact that you don't have that is like great.
Yeah, that was my exact thought. Like, yeah, that's all good because
Yeah.
that's not going to affect squats and lunges necessarily. So you're good.
Yeah. What about weighted hip belts, especially if your spine is severely osteoporotic per imaging?
I don't know of any research on a hip belt. Yanni, is that something that you're familiar with?
I've seen them. My immediate reaction is always that the load is incorrectly placed relative to the target tissue. It's not providing the axial loading. I mean, you're adding this context about your spine being severely osteoporotic. So is the implication that you're trying to avoid loading your spine, and subsequently that's why you would go for a weighted hip belt? Um,
It's
yeah,
kind of like wearing ankle weights. Like we've talked to people who wear their doctor recommended ankle weights, but the weights are at the wrong end, right? They're not actually adding any kind of additional load. You're just kind of dragging a weight along instead.
yeah.
So it has to come from the top down. So if it's below the spine, you're not getting the loading that you need for your bones there to become stronger.
Yeah. So yeah, Paula, I know that you mentioned you have severely osteoporotic scans. Interestingly, the person that commented below you, and I know she won't mind me mentioning this, she is a graduate of our program who also had very severe osteoporosis coming into it. And she did fantastically in the program, having had very similar concerns about loading her spine with the DEXA score that she had. Thanks for chiming in, Lori. That's good to see you here. Yeah, and having the grade one spondylolisthesis as well. That turned out to be something that we can absolutely work with. Susan has a great question. Thanks for answering our questions. You're very welcome. My last one today is, how many people do you take in each cohort, and do you need time to join, or is it okay to join the one next week? Awesome question. So typically our cohorts, it really changes from one to the next, but they range anywhere from like 10 to 20, 22-ish people. We do cap them and keep them fairly small because we want to have cohesion within the group. We want you to get to know your fellow participants and be able to support each other. And also, obviously, because we want each participant to receive the high level of individualized care from your coach as you make your way through it. In the event that we've had very, very large like cohorts, we then bring on a second coach so everybody has that one-on-one guidance. And we actually have an introductory week built into the program. So if you joined on Wednesday morning, you would have an entire week to get familiar with our onboarding materials, connect with your coach about your weight choices, read through all of our materials, get your account set up. There is light programming that first week, which is mostly about the sort of overarching principles of what it is to successfully strength train for bone density. So that week is there partly to help you get situated. Karen, you can chime in as well.
Yeah, that introductory week, what I love about it is the movement assessment. So one of the things we ask everyone to do in that first week is we actually ask you to send us videos of you moving, so we can give you much more personalized feedback on maybe things that need to be tweaked or changed or addressed in some way, or supplemented for something else, or substituted out rather for something else. So yeah, you're good. You can join that morning.
Yeah. Paula, do you ask for a hold harmless agreement before signing up? We do have a client contract and liability waiver. Without that, our insurance does not cover our communication with you, so we're not able to coach you without you having signed that contract. Victoria, I'm so glad you found this useful. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm glad you learned a lot. Thank you so much for being here. Lisa is asking if push-ups are good.
Yeah. Short answer, yeah, push-ups are great and they're part of our program. And that gets some of that loading on the forearm as well, but also just helps to strengthen the whole core, which then in turn supports the spine. So anything we can do to add a little extra muscular support for the bones that have a little bit of weakness in them is great.
And push-ups are also great general upper body strengthening, which is awesome for maintaining better posture. It gives you nice toned arms and shoulders, which nobody minds ever, even though that is not a primary goal of our program. But there are some nice side effects, like having slightly more ripped arms. um, Paula's asking about trabecular bone. Does this program improve that? So, what we're now referring to is like slightly different bone types and qualities and aspects of bone strength. There is nothing in the human body that adapts or functions in isolation or separately from the other parts that are attached to it, or even like in a system-wide context. So the obvious caveat is that the adaptation timelines for everybody look very different based on your personal physiology and anatomy and response to exercise, your nutrition, your genetics, all of that. But the big picture answer is yes, you cannot improve. It's very hard to improve like one thing without influencing another. What would you say, Karen?
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, from the Lift More trial, one of the things they found was, so cortical bone is the outer, more dense layer of bone. Trabecular bone is the inner, spongy bone where the marrow is made. And one of the things they found was that they had a tremendous increase in the cortical bone, actually, which offers a protective effect to the bone as a whole, because now that outer structure of the bone is stronger. And, there's a lot of theories out there on how bone is laid down, but when bone tissue is first laid down, it's soft, it's not mineralized yet. So that's why it takes a year or more to know whether or not you're actually, laying down bone. That's why they give 2 years between DEXA scans, because it takes that long to know if there has been some change in the bone density.
Yeah. Great question. And actually, this is kind of related. To achieve improvement in BMD, is daily strength training recommended?
It's not so much, it's more how much load you are doing. So for example, this program is based on an in-person program. And that program, I believe, is 2 days a week. But they're lifting much heavier weights because they're in a clinical setting with people there to guide them in person. Our strength training, there's plenty of research to show that lifting lighter weights more often helps to improve bone mineral density, and that is what our program does. So we have 4 days a week of strength training, with more moderate weight.
Yeah, it's about generating enough load and stress of a good kind cumulatively over a meaningful period of time. And in the long run, we talk about this a lot too. We don't need absolute 100% adherence and perfection on a day to day and week to week basis. What's most helpful is staying consistent, which means you do what you can when you can, as often as you can, within reason. So it's really going to be that long term consistency that's going to be beneficial for you. Great question. Adrian, hi. I know I have an email from you. I'll respond later this afternoon as well. Does the Osteoporosis Foundation recommend your program? So, the Osteoporosis Foundation, both the US Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation and the International Foundation, are advocacy organizations, and they do not quote unquote recommend or endorse anything in that sense, because that is not their role. Their role is to provide objective, high quality, evidence based data and recommendations for both clinicians and patients. That being said, they obviously do. That goal would not be met if they entertained things that they did not believe to be evidence based and effective. And I know that sounds like a bit of a like I'm skirting the question, but that is just how they operate. They don't provide commercial endorsements of things. But obviously they have reviewed our program. We routinely collaborate with them and have a very close relationship with them. Karen just went to meet with them at the symposium in DC. We just met with the BHOF CEO and program directors at the Global Congress in Rome just a couple of weeks ago. And similarly with the International Osteoporosis Foundation, we are on their committee of corporate advisors, and we are actually the only exercise provider on that committee of select companies who are working together to improve outcomes for osteoporosis sufferers. So I know that's not a yes or no answer, but that's because there isn't a yes or no answer. I hope that provides more context about the status of our program, though. Oh, I'm sorry. There was another thing about whether I made it go away, but there was a question about whether it was a closed chain exercise, but I forget what that is. Uh,
I didn't see it.
maybe you can pop it back in the chat. Sorry, I was too quick removing the question. Okay, and then Paula is saying, so just to be clear, 13 weeks is just to start. Any improvements would take place over a much longer period of consistency to the program, right? Yes, but the 13 weeks is based on the time span of the Lift More trial, which showed improvement in bone density at the end of a 12-week regimen. It depends on your personal adaptation and how you respond to exercise stimulus. Another useful thing to remember is that the 2-year time span between DEXA scans, it's not entirely arbitrary, but it's really not connected to the rate of adaptation as much as it is to the margin of error in the machine. So that's why people are advocating for other technologies like the REMS, the TBS, because those are more sensitive and more accurate. And REMS, the early research shows that can show improvement in as little as 3 to 6 months. So we want you to stay consistent over a longer period of time, because that is what's going to give you the best outcomes. But the actual diagnostics of it are related to variables other than your actual rate of progression. And beyond the bone density, Karen, maybe you can talk a little bit about the sort of functional benefits of like maintaining this kind of exercise routine as a lifestyle, because I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, because remember, the overarching idea here is we're trying to prevent fractures, right? And so, in order to prevent fractures, we need to prevent falls. And so, when we do strength training and we're strengthening our muscles, we're strengthening the support system for the bones. So, even if there was no actual change in bone mineral density, having stronger muscles is going to better cushion and support your bones. So, if you did fall, there's more of a cushioning and supportive layer. But in addition to that, we know that strength training helps to improve balance. So does yoga and Pilates and some of the other things that we've mentioned. And the better balance you have, the better agility you have, all of these things contribute to decreasing fall risk. And that's the ultimate goal, is we want you to not fall so that you do not fracture.
Yeah, great question. And people in the program, like Karen said, the sort of neurological adaptations start to kick in very quickly. Muscular adaptations also come in much more quickly than bone density adaptations. So you are feeling stronger, more coordinated, more capable, more confident in everything that you're doing within usually weeks of,
I
of
can
starting the
I
program.
can
So
give you an example from this cohort that I'm leading, right? It's spring, everybody's outside gardening, and I had a client who already so we're 10 weeks in, and she was gardening this past weekend, lifting bags of soil, moving them around her yard, emptying them, laying them down, and she said that the next day she would normally have been so sore, and she was not sore at all after she did this work. And that's because of the strength training that she's been doing.
And remember too that strength training movements, they are compound, full body functional movements that very closely replicate the movement demands of things that you're doing in your daily life, like picking up heavy bags of soil and moving them around. So that's one of the other benefits of a traditional resistance training program is that there is a lot of functional carryover to the stuff that you're doing in your daily life, which again is not something that we can say of OsteoStrong, where you're standing still in a resisted static contraction. That has no carryover at all. You're not doing anything in your daily life, just like gripping and clenching against a force.
Yeah.
We need to be able to move and actually generate force in that setting.
Yep.
Um, uh, oh, great question. Okay, this is going to be great to loop back around to. Aren't push-ups, heel drops, and stomping all bodyweight exercises?
Ah, yes, but well, heel drops and stomping, remember they're impact exercises, right? So even though you're using your own body weight, it's actually the impact or the force because when we go up in the air and then come back down, remember this was measured in multiples of your own body weight. So if your body weight is 150 pounds and you're doing a stomp, and we know that's approximately 4 times that, now you've got the impact of 4 times 150 contacting the ground. So it's really about the impact. And then, yes, with things like push ups, those are body weight exercises for sure. However, there's a lot of functional benefits to that, and it helps to create core stability. That's a core exercise. Also, it's helping to put that loading through the bones of the forearms to have a protective effect there. But also, that is something that we could then progress because you're thinking about traditional push-ups, and if I now put my feet up on the seat of a chair and do push-ups, now I'm increasing the amount of load that I'm bearing in my arms. So there are all sorts of ways to progress and regress any exercise.
And this is a good time to mention too, like kind of loop back around to this notion that fracture risk is a complex thing made up of multiple variables, and only one of those is bone mineral density. So all of these other functional benefits that you're getting from becoming stronger, more mobile, more confident, you're learning good movement mechanics that allow you to move in a way that poses less risk to your spine. These are all things that are reducing your fracture risk well before you might even get to the point where there would be a measurable change on your DEXA scan. So that is why we consider, and again based on all the evidence out there, resistance training to be like just objectively the most bang for your buck as far as what you could be doing to improve your bone density and to reduce your fracture risk as well.
Mhm.
Um, Paula, I'm not sure what your comment is referring to, just because we've gone through a couple of questions. But if you want to clarify about about the results in 12 weeks, well, that's the Liftmore study. Um,
The Liftmore was 8 months.
oh, 8 months. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, my apologies. Yes. So again, it depends on the regimen. Like we've been saying, there is um, high load, low rep regimes. There are low load, high rep regimens. There's been studies on walking on a treadmill with a weight vest versus walking on a treadmill with no weight vest. So there are multiple angles of approach to take, and really the main criteria for anybody joining our program is determining what is your starting point and how do we meet you where you're at so that we can load you productively and safely so that you can get on track and on the path to eventually meeting your bone density goals and your fracture risk reduction goals. So it all comes down, like the research it provides us helpful data points, but ultimately, you know, the right program for you is going to depend on you. Okay, and thank you, Adrian, for putting back up the question that I accidentally got rid of. Is hopping an open chain exercise because arthritis in knee and was told not to do jumping jacks?
So, yes. But heel drops would be more closed chain because your toes are staying in contact with the ground. So for someone like in your situation, remember we're starting with baby steps and that baby steps are still steps. And we just want to, as Yenny keeps saying, meet you exactly where you are and give you things that are going to work for your body. And with whatever your history is, whatever, whether that's an athletic background or an injury history that we have to take into account, everyone is looked at as an individual and given feedback for you specifically.
Great question. And we've got just a couple more minutes if anybody has any final burning questions. Paula, to answer your question, um, gaining 20 or 25 or 50 pounds would have other adverse effects on your health that I believe would probably have negative consequences. So it would not be the same as adding a 50-pound weight vest unless you were looking to add 50 pounds of pure muscle. But I think it's difficult to compare the two things. Karen, maybe you can give your take on this.
Yeah, no, it's just a higher metabolic demand overall when we have more weight on our frame, and that's not necessarily it's not apples for apples. Your question, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, there would be a lot of other variables that we'd need to factor in, and there would be consequences then interacting with other consequences of gaining 50 pounds that would kind of muddy the water. So it would
We
not
don't
be
know
a
enough.
clear like thing A leads to thing B.
Yeah, we don't know enough about you either, right? We don't know, where you are right now in terms of body weight and health.
Or body composition, your
Yeah.
muscle to other tissue ratio. Um, all right, this almost never happens, but we have answered all the questions in the Q&A. Oh wait, one more popped up. Lisa, oh, I'm so glad you found this informative. Thank you for being here. If there are any final burning questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. I did want to mention also that we're going to send out a recording of this webinar to everybody who registered, so you'll have the opportunity to review it, and any email that comes from us you can hit reply on, and we will it comes directly to us, so we answer that right away. And again, we're here to answer your questions, so like email, social media, anywhere that you want to get a hold of us, we do our best to respond in a very timely manner. Hoping, Paula says, hoping the CoachRx thing will be an easy process. So Paula, we have that introductory week, like I mentioned, which is a very guided, structured, and supported process for getting clients onboarded. I know you had some concerns about the screencasting, which is why we shared some resources for you to test that out on your own if you wanted to. So what I want you to keep in mind is that you're now doing that outside of the context of our established process. So we'll be happy to advise you further, but there's a limit to what we can do without you actually being a client, if that makes sense. But just rest assured that the introductory week is designed to be this very supported and interactive thing, with the intro meeting specifically giving you like the full download and the logistics of the program. Lisa, thank you. We love advocating for bone health. You have a great day too. Carolyn, we're so glad that you were able to join us. Thank you so much. And just as a final reminder, our next group is starting on May 7th. That's next Wednesday. Karen is the coach for that. You have lots of time left to join if you are interested, and if you're at all unsure about anything, just send us an email. You can respond to any of our newsletters that you get from us, including the replay follow-up tomorrow. And we always schedule these to be an hour long, and we kind of with the understanding that there's probably going to be some interesting discussion that ensues. So we're really grateful and happy that you guys all came and had brought your insightful and interesting questions for us to discuss, and that you spent a big chunk of your Saturday with us to learn about this. So thank you all so much. We appreciate having you in our community, and are really grateful for your interest and your engagement. This is why we do this. We truly do want to advocate for better bone health and better outcomes and more options and more agency that everybody that's dealing with this diagnosis. So thank you all very, very much. We look forward to hopefully seeing you online, on email, in one of our groups starting soon. We have program start dates throughout the year. So thanks very much. Thank you, Karen, for sharing your time, your
Thank
insights, and
you.
your expertise as well. We will see you all soon somewhere. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.